Hey guys, today I'm talking about growing potatoes. Any variety you like can work in this method, but we're growing potatoes in 5-gallon buckets. And this is a little bit different than your average growing in 5-gallon buckets because we're using 2 buckets per 2 potatoes. And the reason we're doing that is we can easily pull it out without having to dump it out, and we can collect the potatoes as we needed at whatever size we need. If we want to wait till they mature, we can wait to that, or we can collect a few early. But it's really a unique way of growing potatoes in buckets. Let's go out to the let's get out of the greenhouse, and I'll show you exactly how to arrange the buckets together and do a little bit of cutting on the bucket itself. Now, one thing I forgot to mention is, since we have 2 buckets here, one bucket is going to act as a water reservoir. Just the bottom 3 or 4 inches is going to act as the water reservoir, and we're going to put a hole in the side which will prevent this bucket from the soil from becoming too saturated and causing your potatoes to rot. But this right here, the system, is a great way to grow potatoes because if you live in a dry summer area like I do, your potatoes can really dry out quickly in containers. So by having this secondary bucket, it really helps prevent total dehydration of your potatoes, and you end up with some really shriveled up small potatoes there. So let me show you how we're going to mark the first bucket and cut the panels out we need to get it started. Now, what I've discovered based upon the size of these buckets is about every 8 3/4 you're going to need to make a mark. So we're going to try to do this on camera without getting out of frame there. But what we're going to do is we're going to start there, and we're going to go 8 3/4 and make our first mark. Slide around it again, 8 3/4 again, 8 3/4 again, and our last mark, 8 3/4, and let's see if that takes us back to our original. So we're right around, just slightly over a little bit, but it's right about 8, slightly over 8 3/4. So that's the marks we're going to make. We're going to create posts on each side. So we're going to take just a common paint stick, and on each side of that mark, we're going to draw a straight line down the side, down close to the bottom, move to the left of the mark, do the same thing. Okay, come over, do the same thing around the next mark. Remember, you're to the right, your paint stick is to the right of it. We're trying our best to keep this perfectly straight, but it doesn't have to be perfect, but just want it to be. We want 4 good columns here, not to make the bucket where it would collapse. And of course, it is going to alter its structural integrity, but not to the point where it will collapse. So let's just mark this one. I think we didn't quite get the top there. Let's go around to the next one. This should be our last one. Okay, to the right, 1 mark over there. We're not quite getting the top portion of it there. Okay, and we're going to go to the left, do the same mark there. Now we're going to freehand this, and we're going to mark out our panels that we're going to be cutting out. This is the first panel we're moving. This is the second. This is the third panel. And this one is our 4th panel. And so these are going to be our 4 posts that allows us to harvest the potatoes without having to do it all at once. So in other words, we could take just 1 or 2 potatoes from our bucket and allow the others to continue to grow larger. So let's go ahead and cut these 4 sections out. So we've taken out our 4 equal panels, and this is going to allow us to harvest potatoes if we want to do baby potatoes, or if we want to take 1 potato at a time. If we want to check on the growth of the potatoes, this allows us to take a look at that. Now, we need a little bit of soil that has a little bit of, it's going to hold together well. You don't want overly sandy soil because it's going to all drop out. So just remember that. The next thing we have to do is drill holes. I'd say about 4 holes in the bottom of our bucket, and this is a food grade bucket. The number 2 is in a triangle, and it says HDPE. And actually, this bucket said on the side of it before I cut it up, I'm sure I could find it, but it said food grade bucket, no BPEs in it. So let's drill our four holes in the bottom. Now, why is this important, having the holes in the bottom, is our primary bucket that we have is going to allow wicking action. We could put some wicking material in here, such as a piece of rag, a small rope, and it would wick up to our potatoes. And if you really don't like watering, then that would be the thing to do. But this bucket is going to sit inside of this bucket, and we have to get a measurement of exactly where this bucket comes to, and we just hold it up to some light, shine a flashlight in, and we'll know exactly where that's at. So I'm going to do that right now. I'm going to find my marker, and we'll make that mark, and I'll show you why we need to know exactly where the interior bucket comes to, the bottom of it. Now what I've done is I've held this bucket up to the sunlight, and I was able to see exactly where the bottom of this bucket came to, the interior bucket. So we want to go up about a ½ an inch to maybe 3/4 of an inch and put a small drainage hole in the side. Now I'm doing this on both sides of the bucket in case one gets clogged, and it doesn't have to be a massive hole. We don't want it to go over that ½ inch mark. Okay. Now we have 2 drainage holes. Our interior bucket sits down in there, and I don't know if this is visible. I can see it with my eye because there's a little bit of light. It's almost a transparent thing there, but you can see the bottom of this bucket is just below this hole, so it can drain just a little bit. So that's what we're going to do, is we're going to do this, make sure we have proper drainage. We will monitor this with a soil moisture meter and make sure that the soil does not get too waterlogged or your potatoes will rotten. And also, again, I mentioned this before, but this is food grade and it's BPA free. So you can find these. This is Tractor Supply bucket, and I think these were 2 for $8, so they're not expensive at all. You can also get these buckets, and I mentioned this in many other videos, at Firehouse Subs, and they're $3 each, so it's actually $2 cheaper, the buckets that come from Firehouse Subs, and I have quite a few of those. So anyways, that is what you want. You want a food grade bucket. You're going to do what we just recently did just a second ago, cut out our 4 panels. We've cut out our drainage holes on the bottom. We have our 2 holes on the side of the bucket for drainage. And so now we'll go on to the next step. Now, one thing I'm going to do is I'm going to add 2 paper towels to the bottom of the interior bucket. And I'm just going to kind of push it all the way down in there. Now, the reason I'm doing that is I don't want, as we're watering it over the period of weeks and months waiting for the potatoes to grow, I don't want the dirt consistently falling into the water reservoir and clogging it and make it harder to drain. So just remember, you want to make sure you use a couple of paper towels that will aid in the drainage of the interior bucket. Now you want to make the soil as rich as possible, and you want to use a really good potting soil. I've got a video where I've made my own potting soil. I'll link that up above, but you want about a 1/4 cup of blood meal and a 1/4 cup of bone meal, and you might actually go to ½ a cup of bone meal if you want to go the organic route. But if you want to use a product off the shelf, I really like Schultz because it has a very high phosphorus count. The NPK number, the P in the NPK is extremely high. I think it's like 54 or 56. And the nitrogen, I think, is 10, and I think it's 10, 54, 56, something like 12 or something like that. But it really helps the potatoes grow, and that's one of my favorite products off the shelf if you don't want to go the organic route. Now, in this process, you can do what is called healing. You could put just ½ a bucket of soil, put your potatoes in there, and if you've already started your potatoes in some sand, that's a great way to start the chitting process. You don't have to do that. The chits are these small root systems that starts to form on the outside of the potato. So you can either do that in advance, or you don't necessarily have to if you just want to go straight into the bucket. The chitting process is one that gets you a little bit ahead of the game if you're starting early in the season. So you can put your potatoes directly in there, but remember, you want to make sure you use organic potatoes that have not been treated with a sprout inhibitor, because that will stop the chitting process from happening. When I say chitting, I believe it's spelled C-H-I-T-T-I-N-G, and that's where, like I said, that's the root formation. So let's add our first ½ bucket in here, and we'll do that right now. Okay, we're going to add our soil, about half a container before we put our potatoes in. Half of the 5-gallon container we're going to fill. We're going to level that out, break it up. This is a really good quality soil, potting soil. And like I say, I do make my own from time to time, but I'm completely out of it right now. Now, one thing I want to say about this process is because we've cut the sides out of the interior bucket, you need to do a little bit of firming on the soil. So when you pull the bucket out to check to see how big your potatoes have gotten, you don't want your soil completely falling out. You want it to remain well packed in there. So as you can see, it doesn't fall out. And that's what you're doing. You're just trying to not overly pack it, not too hard. And that will stay together. And you can see, since you're going to be putting your potatoes around the edges, you'll be able to get a better view of what's actually growing in there when you go to check on it. So I love roasted red potatoes with some olive oil and garlic on a fry pan. So I'm going to put 3 of these in here. Now these get a little bit smaller. These are not really large sized potatoes, but I'm going to put 3 in there. I'm going to take one out for a different bucket. Actually, I have 2 for a different bucket. And we're going to put them in front of the windows of our panels that we removed so we can come back and check it later. I'm going to add a little bit more soil, but I'm not going to cover the entire sprout that's coming out of it. I just want it to go to the bottom of it. Again, it's a little bit difficult when I'm filming to do all of this at one time. So I'm going to do that around the edges. Try not to go it off there. And these I had growing earlier in some straw bales, but I want to move them to these buckets because I think they're going to do much better. And they're a little bit dehydrated because they were in the greenhouse and it's been extremely hot in there. So I'm going to water this well once I get this bucket started. Now, as these grow taller, and I think as you may have noticed in the greenhouse, there was a tomato cage stuck down in there. So we're going to use a tomato cage. We're going to attach these to the tomato cage as they grow, and we're going to fill the dirt up close to the top. And remember, we had that water reservoir on the bottom, so they will do quite well. Like I said, today has been unusually hot for the beginning of May. Today is May the 4th, and it is really quite hot. So these are a little bit wilted, but that is the process. Now we're going to go on to the next step. Now, before we add our last step on, I'm going to dust the top of the soil with bone meal again because I want that phosphorus level to be as high as possible so we can really have the potatoes doing well. And this is going to help that potato formation. So again, this is just organic bone meal. It has a high phosphorus count as well. So that's what we're doing. Now the last step I'll show you, and I'll bring you in a little closer so you can see exactly what we can do. Now, I'm using straw, but you can use finely ground wood chips, or you can use aspen tree shavings. I have some of those in the greenhouse as well, but I'm just going to show you probably the most simple thing that most people do when it comes to protecting the soil from extreme heat. Now, we want the soil to retain as much moisture as possible. So I'm just going to put some straw in here around these potatoes that desperately need some water. And I'm going to do the same thing with the other bucket. These look a little bit better. I don't think they're quite as dehydrated. A little bit hard to see that one. I've got 2 in here, but this one's been covered by the bone meal. We're just going to make sure we put that all around where our sprout's coming out there. Make sure we don't cover up this one because there's actually 2 in here. And that's going to help retain moisture and allow the potatoes to go right through there and just keep growing. So the last step is going to be our tomato cage. So the last thing we're going to do is we're going to add some tomato cages to our pot and try not to hit the greenhouse roof there. And I'm just going to carefully push that in. And so as these grow, I'm going to attach it. Let's see if we can do this. It's a little bit difficult there because we're kind of brushing up against the side of the bucket. Okay, so we're going to, as these grow, we're going to attach it with some bread ties or zip ties and allow it to grow up the sides around the tomato cages. But we're also going to do a little bit of pruning so that the potato plant puts its energy back into the soil or into the root system, the potato itself. If we have a lot of foliage up here and we have not as much growth underneath, we're going to have very small potatoes. So I want it to be a lot of potatoes. The red potatoes obviously are not going to get big, but we want a lot of them. So we don't want a massive amount of green growth up top. So we'll do a little bit of pruning up there as well. So this is the final step, and I'm going to show you what our potatoes look like if I can get it out without making a huge mess. So let's see if I can get a close-up on this where you can see it a little better. All right, I had to take our tomato cage off of our potato bucket so it wouldn't be in my way when I was trying to lift it, because there's a little bit of suction there. But as you can see, there are some potatoes in there. It's wanting to fall because I let it dry out a little bit before the filming. Let's see if I can spin it around there without making a giant mess. But anyways, I see potatoes in all the windows. So we are having some growth here. There's actually 2 tomato plants in here. This one on the left did not grow quite as well as the one on the right. But we do have tomatoes down below, so we'll be harvesting them as we desire and allowing the potatoes left in the bucket to grow a little bit larger. So guys, I can think of a lot of reasons for growing potatoes in buckets like this. You know, containers where you can easily lift it, you can harvest what you need. But one of the most important reasons for doing this is if you're in a limited space situation, if you live in a patio home, an apartment, a condominium, maybe you just have a balcony to grow on, this is the perfect way to do it. And because it's in a 5-gallon bucket, not in a massive container, you don't have to struggle to pour it out and pick it up and whatever. A small 5-gallon container like this can be picked up. Even if takes 2 people, if you have a mobility issue, you can have somebody help you do it, and then you can pull your potatoes out. But if you're growing in something like a large bucket, a much larger bucket than this, like let's say a 15, 20-gallon bucket, it's going to be a dumping situation where you have to go through the dirt, collect your potatoes like that. So something like this is a lot easier to do. And also when it has this water reservoir down at the bottom, you don't have to worry quite so much about dehydration. So this is perfect for limited space gardening in places where you just want to garden out your back door. You can do that very easily. So just remember, this type of system is really easy to put together. It's nothing complicated, and as you can see, it works great. So guys, as you can see, I've collected a few potatoes there. So it looks like it's going to be roasted potatoes or maybe even French fries or something like that tonight with tonight's salmon that I'm planning on cooking. So these are ready to go out back into the garden and be watered. So just try this method. It's really a fun and interesting project. If you have kids, they'll love it too because it's really easy to put together. Obviously, you'll want to wear some protective gloves when you're using your saw. The saw I had was a little bit of an overkill. My smaller, more fine cutting saw is broken. So I obviously had to use something like a pruning saw, reciprocating saw like that. So it's much too much power for that. You could cut it with a small hand saw, but it's going to take a lot more time. The bucket's not terribly thick, but it will take a little bit of effort. So get out in your garden and try to do this. You'll be growing potatoes in no time at all. Hey, thanks so much for watching. I really appreciate it. Have a great day.